Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It's the notorious, glorious V, the Grill Economist, coming to you live with our main guy, the man who needs no introduction whatsoever. It is W. W, what's going on, buddy? How are you?
Hey, good. How you doing?
Good, man. I know it's early for you. It's like, what, 7:30 where you are?
Well, that's not that early. I mean, I've been up all night anyway.
Exactly, man. Exactly. Brother, there's a lot going on. People and myself would love to have your take on what's going on from your side of the world, from your intelligence tidbits that you have garnered and gleaned.
hmm
Where do you want to begin? You want to start domestic and then move outwards, or
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
go for it.
Well, you know, this summer, I think even though some people are anticipating just all sorts of things happening related to the Russia investigation and potential charges and all that, uh, I don't actually personally see that it's going to go too far too fast. And the reason is because uh, the Democrats are into stalling as much as they can, trying to find reasons to uh, uh, continue to go after Trump. And that's not exactly against what President Trump wants to do. He wants to let them have their way at a certain level because it's going to push it right out into the election cycle. And he, in fact, said that in Panama City the other night that you know, their delays are literally going to win the election for him in 2020 as these serious charges begin being first laid out, in the fall. I expect they'll wait until after they had the hearings in Congress for the Senate, and these people have to explain themselves somewhat, and then charges will follow sometime after that. And of course, then the court process is going to drag all through next year. Um, that is going to leave this summer wide open. And what are you going to do in the summer? Well, the Trump administration is not going to sit on their hands. We certainly have Iran, we have North Korea, China, all of those issues there, and Venezuela is still sitting on the table. Things to be done. And I think those are the things that the administration is going to focus on through these summer months. And then the thing that most people aren't seeing, they don't see it coming. Whenever you're having a war or a battle, uh, before you go in and actually engage the other side, even in a bombing campaign, aircraft, etc., first thing you do before you even go after their anti-aircraft batteries is you take out their communications. You damage their ability to communicate, and between each other, their equipment to communicate to behind the scenes, etc. And so the aspect of this engagement that President Trump is about to undertake uh, against the people behind the dossier and that have been attacking him through this first couple of years of his presidency, uh, he's going to take out Hollywood and he's going to take out the news media. Um, it's not so much that they'll cease to exist, but their ability to function as they have been is going to be degraded, where the public isn't going to give the same weight to anything they have to say. So I expect that we're going to see some things happening related to star power out of Hollywood with the revelations of what's actually been going on behind the scenes in Hollywood for quite some time. And I mean, the stuff related to the Podesta type uh, things, the spirit cooking, and the more wild allegations of activities going on in Hollywood, um, much more serious charges related to the sex clubs, more serious than NXIVM. Uh, if you follow the Q stuff, 100 times worse than NXIVM, which that's a pretty big number. Um, and then also going after the mainstream media, uh, you don't do a straight on run at them. They are Hollywood. They're backed by Hollywood. They're really performers. And so going after Hollywood is the back door to getting at the mainstream media. And if you see it that way, um, as soon as Hollywood's fighting to be relevant and mainstream media, those outlets are, trying to defend Hollywood on stuff that's really not very defensible. When people hear what's been going on, I think the shock and outrage, it's going to be hard to apologize for some of the things going on behind the scenes. And I think that degrades their credibility to the public. Coming into the fall, then, with the hearings that are going to happen first, and then I think charges actually being laid against these people who have been involved in the spying campaign, the appointment gifts, like the Loretta uh, Lynch situation. Those kind of charges are extremely serious. The spying inside the campaigns, far more serious than people in the mainstream media certainly led on to. But the Trump people, the conservatives, are not going to deal with it as though it's just business as usual. And that fight goes out through 2020. And I think President Trump's correct. Gets him elected again.
Yeah,
Does that
absolutely.
make sense to you? I mean, I know that's probably not exactly what most people are thinking, especially people following the Q aspects. They're expecting something instant, and it's just going to be devastating. But what do you think there'd be?
Well, yeah, I mean, no one has seen anything, you know, devastating. It's so far been looking like a death by a thousand cuts. Um, I mean, seeing, I mean, look at the hard numbers, man. I mean, look at YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think that's part of it. Uh, the use of the social media and YouTube, the checking people from being able to have conversations in those areas uh, that were conservative in nature, that sort of thing. I think that that is going to continue to be attacked by the administration, but I don't think that's going to get hit too much right now. I don't think those changes come till sometime, probably late this year or early next year. So, I think in the aggregate, what I'm saying is the 2 years, 2.5 years that this whole spying thing has ground on, expect a reversal of that. There'll be some swift hits. I mean, wouldn't surprise me a bit that Comey does, in fact, get arrested. And the Q team has alluded to as much. And something, an arrest here or there, or some kind of a serious legal challenge
mhm.
gets set up. But the big ones, the real, Brennan and people like that, I think those are let go for a few months because it's a timing thing.
It's very
Uh,
possible. Yeah. Like as I was saying, I had an incoming message that kind of threw me off. But if you look at the media, they're totally damn irrelevant, man. I mean, CNN down 30%, YouTube down 30%, mainstream media down all across the board. Nobody's following them. Nobody listening to them. The fact that they're, the fact that the recent purge by Facebook, the purge, and W. Here's the worst part, man. I mean, I was just watching the other day, and I talked about this on my Patreon. Is we have this young lady by the name of Laura Loomer, who's a conservative, and what not only was she purged from Facebook and Twitter, but she was also banned from using the Cash App, using PayPal, using Venmo. These are payment services, how people get paid, how people get their money, earn their income as somebody who's a content creator. On top of that, she's also banned from using Uber and Lyft. and even Grubhub, and so in other words, she can't even order a burger if she wanted to using one of these on demand type services. This is insanity, and we've heard what happened to one of the gentlemen from the Proud Boys, who was a Hispanic gentleman. He's Cuban American, and he had his bank account closed down by Chase. All this is doing it's they're making themselves known. All the hidden institutions, the intolerance of the left, the intolerance of the corporatocracy, so to speak, has really been made known, and now they've just really stood up as the nails, and they're going to get knocked down, man. They're going to get knocked down. That beatdown is it's coming because there has to be alternatives. I mean, there has to be.
Well, the left's moving further left. Their center is moving further left. And the problem is there is a edge of the earth. These flat earthers are going to fall right off the edge. They're going to wish the world was round. They're moving so far left. They're going to fall off into the Sea of Dragons. It's what's really interesting with what President Trump has accomplished is it's getting harder and harder to be middle of the road, and you're going to have to pick a side. And the problem, in part, is you could feign ignorance, or you know, you could be ignorant but to the left, don't want to know the facts. Some of what's about to happen is so grotesque and so extreme that you won't have the luxury of not taking a side. You're going to have an opinion, and to the, you know, probably the 80, 90th percentile, people are not going to be able to defend at all what they hear. So they're going to have to side against their Hollywood stars and against the left media that's also part of this. The um, the activity that is going to be gone after, and you have to think, you have NXIVM, and those prosecutions taking place. That's Alan Mack, people like that, who were well respected, had good programs, shows, whatever, had real star power. And again, if you go with the Q team, and you cannot, if you're in denial that the president's involved in the Q operation, then you probably not even need to be in this conversation because you're not paying attention. As I've said before, there's no question that the president is involved in and orchestrating the Q operation. Military intelligence and NSA are involved in it, and they're using AIs to coordinate the timing and content of these Q drops. But they're saying some pretty extreme things. They've put it all right out on the table when they're telling you that what's coming out next in the Hollywood side is 100 times worse than NXIVM. You got to pay attention. And they're not going to wait till next year to reveal that, because going after the communications, going after that media support is a huge part of removing the support, removing the protection that these players are going to have when they're testifying before Congress, and leaving them kind of, you know, twisting in the breeze. Um, so I think that that's the part that most people aren't seeing. That goes this summer, and then the Senate hearings in the fall, some House hearings, and then charges, and happening over the winter. And those things, some in court, and some are going to be treason. One of the things I wanted to mention, V, you've heard me say it before in your show, your listeners have. I said I'm going after Brennan and Halper, that they are the nexus of evil, in my opinion, on a lot of this. And so Halper, for those that haven't heard this before or don't know, he's the guy that really is the um, evil genius in a Spectre kind of a thing. He, a James Bond type of a thing. He's the guy that works the plan. He's the kind of chess master behind the scenes. He's got this secret plan, and everybody's going to go do it because he's done all the calculations. It's going to work. Halper was an aide in the Reagan administration in the White House. Then he became a banking person during the Reagan administration, and he's actually the unindicted co-conspirator on Iran-Contra. He's the person who was never named or charged. Then he goes over to England and he starts teaching at Cambridge, and he's doing consulting work, and he actually gets a British passport. So he's got dual citizenship between the US and Britain. And he's the guy who was trying to get a job inside the Trump campaign and hoping to get a job in the Trump White House. Now, think about this for a second. Who was Halper again? Halper, during the Reagan administration, was operating as a spy inside the Reagan White House, doing exactly what he was hoping to do again in the Trump campaign and White House. Who was he working with? When they destroyed those records during Iran-Contra, when Fawn Hall was carrying records out in her boots and her bra, and Ollie North was running the shredders in the White House, who was that actually protecting? It wasn't protecting President Reagan. He hadn't signed off on everything. It happened in his White House. He took the hit for it because it happened in his administration. He wasn't passing the guard, but he also said he wasn't aware completely of certain things that were going on in the White House. But he didn't pass the buck because it happened under his watch. The reality is that was George Bush stuff. The Bush administration, the Bush people, where did Bush come from prior to being the vice president? He was over at CIA. George Bush came into the CIA as director right after the Church Committee hearings in '75, when all the revelations of MK Ultra and assassination plots and all sorts of bizarre mischief came out into public view. So, what was his role over at CIA? Why did he go to the directorship? Because he was there to re or reorganize how they were doing things and to protect certain operations. When he became vice president, he was in there still operating with all of his CIA buddies and wanted to make sure he had control and communications inside the White House because, he's not necessarily vice presidents don't necessarily know everything, but he was head of the Drug Interdiction Task Force. All of that mischief going on in South America was George H.W. Bush. And I've said that before in your show. Who was his guy to make sure that they had a firewall to Reagan and then became the money man, the banker on Iran-Contra? Halper. He was in on it the whole time, and that is the piece of shit that was trying to orchestrate Misfood and all these other little secret guys and coordinate with them. And where did Stroke and Page go to meet to coordinate all of this spying into the Trump campaign? They went to London. They were over there meeting with Halper and Downer and those folks over there, these Brits. That's a foreign government spy agency and all the Five Eyes conspiring with our CIA people and our FBI people to spy on our campaign and then to try and infiltrate this president's new administration to take it down. I don't know how you can be any more treasonous than that against the American people. So I don't think these things end up being just go to trial in some federal court. That is treasonous stuff. That does go to a military tribunal. And I think that people are going to be shocked by that when it finally does happen. But I don't think that President Trump is in as much of a rush to get to that aspect of what's coming um, as a lot of the people following the Q stuff uh, and that are aware of what's going on might think. He's going to let them do their delay and put it right into the 2020 election cycle, and people are going to have to pick a side. And then that combined with the more serious sex and trafficking and other things uh, is going to take away the comms prior to these other things. They're not going to have the media like it is right now, backing them and asking all these dumb questions. Well, why can't we do this in the Mueller report? Why can't we, uh, just arrest President Trump and put him in jail or his kid or something like that? That kind of silliness is going to not even be heard by the American people. They're not going to have any interest in hearing those kind of arguments because the media is not even going to be viable enough to make those kind of claims and have anybody hear them. They might say it, but the people are just not going to be listening to it. Does that click for you there, V?
Yeah, that clicks. Definitely, absolutely.
So, looking at the bigger picture, even though we start domestic, now we get offshore and we go, well, okay, you have foreign intelligence services offshore, a foreign government, agents of a foreign government involved in trying to throw an election here in the US, involved in trying to undermine the presidency here in the US and our legislative process, distract us. Uh, can we stomach that? Um, what's the real implication here, and why are they doing this? Uh, the why is part of the problem that people can't get their brain around. So let me really go out there and live now. Let's look at the Obama presidency. Uh, I've said it on your show before. Barack Obama, first of all, was not born in Hawaii. He was born in at the Peace Arch Hospital in Vancouver, BC. And he wasn't born on August 4th, 1961. Now, uh, he was several months old when his mother picked him up and then came over to the UW, and girls that babysat for her while she was starting school and who had seen her uh, uh, a couple months before the quarter started, the fall quarter started. First of all, they said she wasn't pregnant. And second of all, they said that kid was, 6, 8 months old, bare minimum, and probably older when they started babysitting in October, the first part of October. So if he wasn't actually born on August 4th, 1961, why was that date chosen? And remember, they weren't even thinking about Hawaii at the time, coming up with a birth certificate there. That was just a claim. Um, why was that date chosen? And I will tell you that in the intelligence community, a lot of times you like to put little subtle tells. These guys are into magic. They're into uh, their wizardry. It's part of their little games amongst the guys, and so they'll put a little hidden uh, thing in an action that they're doing that it's like a hidden fingerprint. It tells everybody down the road they're having a laugh at a certain level. They're also tagging something as their own. So, what is August 4th, 1961? That is the Queen Mother's birthday. She was born August 4th, 1900. It's a Brit sign that he is a Brit asset, even at birth, even as deployed to mom, because these groups are working together. MI5 and 6 are working together hand in hand with FBI and CIA, but they're not working necessarily in the 100% legal side. These guys are, some of it's, you know, fair exchange between agency directors and personnel, et cetera. It's all in the open. But behind the scene, they have their little secret handshake groups. They're part of these globalist organizations. They're going to the same summer Grove meetings, and they're involved in Bilderbergers and CFR and all these other Club of Rome, etc., doing all their little secret handshake stuff. Because at the end of the day, these people are globalists in several nations working together between each other to drive all of the nations into this global empire that they foresee. And so they have their fingers in all these different locations. So keeping track of the players and the cards can't tell the players out of program. That birth date is a little tell. That's one of our guys. And remember, even the allegation that Obama's dad came out of Kenya is kind of a Brit thing. It was a Brit protectorate at the time. Um, One thing I will add is that when you see all these players and the efforts that they went to from the intelligence agency side, why why did Obama's mother um, need this black baby? First off, if she didn't have him, um, what's the deal with this baby? It's a cover for her because she ends up going to Indonesia. She's working, she's going to school there in Hawaii, and she's getting ready. She's being groomed to go work doing intelligence work, and so she needed this as a cover going to her next assignment, which was in Indonesia. And her mother, Barack Obama's grandmother, she was working in the intelligence community. So was dad. He was an informant for the FBI, a paid informant. This was a family business. So we've talked about that before, but then you step back and you go, and so there's other people doing this as a business. Yes, that's this whole group that ended up being the group over there in England, and they're working as a team in Italy, in Israel, up in Ukraine. All of them are working together to try and take out the candidate for president here in the United States that wasn't their globalist person, which was Hillary Clinton. So you have uh, foreign nationals involved in all types of intrigue, even espionage into the US election, and they're all working together. Those aren't all different operations. They're coordinated together operations. Now let's go back further for a second, though. When did they start going after President Trump? They started before he was ever an announced candidate. They started when he was thinking about being a candidate, all the way back in the 2010 zone, when he was asking questions with other people, where's the birth certificate? He was looking like he might announce. And uh, uh, of course, they went out and got Loretta Fuddy into the job there in Hawaii. Loretta Fuddy was a asset of the CIA and had been all her life. And she had worked in Indonesia. Barack Obama's mom and Loretta Fuddy are both members of Subud, this pseudo-religious organization that the uh, uh, president of Indonesia at the time called out in a news conference as being a CIA cover operation, this supposed religious organization. And both Loretta Fuddy and Barack Obama's mom belong to it. And it's a CIA cover operation. Um, and by the way, you never see Barack Obama's mom and Loretta Fuddy in the same room at the same time. Go take a look at the pictures again. Barack Obama's mom supposedly died several years before Barack Obama became a senator. And then suddenly here's Loretta Fuddy, and she's in all the same places. They lived only a mile or so apart in Seattle. They were both in Indonesia. Loretta Fuddy is Barack Obama's mother. She's the same person. It's Supergirl. Why? She's the asset of the CIA. And they went after Trump at the press club meeting after the birth certificate came out, and were just relentless in going after Trump. They wanted to tear him down before he ever got a chance to be a candidate so they could keep Barack Obama in. But now the why and the who was involved. I've never said this to your audience before, V, and this is really important information. And I repeated myself on some of this stuff, but for a reason. The aspect that hasn't been seen thus far and hasn't been understood, the Muslims, the Muslim Brotherhood connection to all of the events Barack Obama and to Saudi Arabia and to this Soros operation. You know, Soros was the most frequent guest, non-government employee to the White House in the first term of Barack Obama. So Soros is a pretty important person in all of these things. Who was funding and helping to get all these Muslims to invade Europe and England? And who was also funding and helping to get all of these Muslims on U.S. carriers flown into the U.S. and given passports and money to get established here? You know, UPS flights flying in the middle of the night, delivering hundreds of people to cities all around the country every night. And then they get there, they get a passport, citizenship, cash to go get a house and move into a community from all over North Africa and the Mideast. And they were literally just invading the country. You're worried about Mexico, you're sending them in from these other places. Who was pushing that angle? And of these Muslim Brotherhood, you got Jarrett in there in the White House as Barack Obama's advisor. First policy, foreign policy speech that Barack Obama does, he goes over to Egypt and lays the groundwork for reshaping the Mideast. And then all of the policies that are done that lead to this Arab Spring. What's going on there? This was a globalist plan by all these globalist network secret handshake groups to create the basis for a conflict in the Mideast on religious grounds. And Barack Obama was a key part of that plan. He had to be there to orchestrate this. Saudi Arabia, Barack Obama's money for college, it comes from the Saudis. Where did Brennan go? Brennan was the guy that took care of all of the creation of the false history for Barack Obama. All of his time at Columbia. You have students that went to Columbia, had the exact same major as Barack Obama. 4 years, never saw the guy. Never saw the guy. What's the story? They were creating a history. What was Brennan's job over at CIA? Creating histories for people, for operatives in the field. He was creating a history for Barack Obama. Who got the money out of the Saudis for Obama's Harvard education and heading the Harvard Law Review and all this other created history? Brennan. Who gets the station chief job in Saudi Arabia? Brennan. Who protects the passport information for Barack Obama that shows he went to Pakistan and other places, and the officer ends up dying that catches him in the act of breaking in the building? Harris, or not Harris, it's Harrell or whatever. I always get caught up on how that name is pronounced. And so there's this picture that starts to emerge. And then the unheard part that your listeners haven't heard before, that nobody's put this piece together. I'm telling your people, really, for the first time anywhere that anybody's actually started to say this. The Catholic Church, Catholic family services, various operations in the Catholic Church. What was Barack Obama's job that got him this title as a community organizer? He was working for Catholic services in Chicago. When did that come about? He was over in Kenya, and doing a walkabout in Kenya to go see all his roots. Nobody knows where he got the money to go over there. Oh yeah, he was actually working for a front company for CIA in Chicago before that. And he suddenly has the money to go to Kenya, and then he comes back to Chicago and goes to work. Well, who's in Kenya at the same time as a Jesuit priest? Stroke's brother. Stroke from the FBI, center of this whole thing at the FBI. His brother's a Jesuit priest over in Kenya, and it's right in the area where Barack Obama goes. These are family-run operations. They're coordinating between each other. Um, the money for taking care of these refugees, who's getting paid big money, big money to help settle these refugees in the United States? Catholic Family Services, huge amounts of money. When Loretta Fuddy has to get taken out of the picture, when the CIA operative who is sent in to the Hawaii Department of Public Health to make the paper records. Remember, the computer records were altered by Montgomery, who has the case and all the filings that, not Judicial Watch, but what's his name that was the head of that, uh, uh, has been doing. Montgomery went into federal facilities run by the FBI and CIA, and then altered records, voter records in Florida, banking records, and then did the research on the birth certificate stuff in the computer records in Hawaii, but he couldn't physically create a birth certificate. And if you remember, the governor and other people there, they looked behind every file cabinet, under every desk, and swept out the safe trying to find a birth certificate for Obama, and they couldn't find it. They had a zone that they knew they could get to on the numbers. And so suddenly Loretta Fuddy ends up there, and within a few weeks, oh, miraculously, she finds the birth certificate and publishes it, gives it to the attorneys. What's the coordination there? When Loretta Fuddy needs to be taken out of the picture because lawsuits and investigations have the potential of starting to get some traction, then they just need her to disappear again. She goes over to Kalapapa, the leper colony run by the Catholics, and that's very ultra private. I mean, it might as well be Area 51. You can't get in there without a permit. There's nobody around. It's on an island. Even the people who live on the island can't get that side of the island easy. You got to go on a donkey. You don't just drive your car over there. Very private location. And they do this staged plane crash, totally staged. I've talked about that with your people before. Who's running that facility? Who's coordinating it? That's Catholic Services. So they have an interest in having Barack Obama stay in play here because they're getting huge, huge, huge money. And here's the part that you haven't heard, another piece of it. The current Pope, remember when the prior Pope all of a sudden decides to resign and goes into seclusion there at the Vatican? The word has been out all the way back to 2016 and 17. There have even been a handful of articles on this, that the people behind the Pope stepping down and the Jesuit Pope stepping into that office were Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and George Soros. The payoff for helping get Loretta Fuddy off the map, the payoff for getting all of these Muslims into the US and into England and across Europe, was to get their Pope, their Jesuit Pope, in power in the Vatican. Totally political. And there's pushback now happening this very second from Catholics across the country, across the world, to actually have this Pope taken out of office because, is the Pope Catholic? They're saying what he's saying is not right, that it's in contradiction to church doctrine. And in fact, it's been reported and people are talking about it. The current place where that conflict is coming to a head people pushing back against the Pope and his forces with the Jesuits and being pushed back against by other church members, that focal points in South America and in Venezuela specifically, that the players that want Maduro are related to this Jesuit faction and are being supported allegedly by the Russians, but it's really not so much the Russians. It's this Vatican. The Russians is like, saying the Russians did the campaign thing here against Trump. It's a ruse. It's the Vatican fighting to keep their Jesuits that have a financial toehold into the Maduro regime and in Venezuela, and for other operations that they're involved in that are not defensible, that are horrible. And the other Catholic groups who are backing Guaido and want to overturn that government. And it goes to money changing hands, it goes into the banking practices going on in the Vatican, and money being hid for companies related to these groups, including people like Soros. So there's a whole undercurrent here. It's like a Godfather movie. There's a whole undercurrent here that's completely off the radar of 99.99999% of the people out there. But I believe we're going to see some of that percolating up to the top and becoming more apparent, more obvious over these next many months, because that's the other war that's taking place. They were trying to create religious conflict because, in the largest sense, if you go back to these globalists, uh, they really want to have a third world war, because after that war, they intend to walk in after all the destruction, pick up the pieces, reorganize the world, and own the world. And so, just in a very staccato explanation. And but they need this huge war to start that. That's what this whole Mideast reshaping was about, and this conflict going into Syria. The same players were trying to create a religious basis for war. If you go into the Ukraine, it really is a religious war. The Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox, and this bizarre Vatican-run faction that is, working with Soros support to try and take down the government in Ukraine and cause this conflict. So we see the same issues happening behind the scenes all over the place. And I'm just telling you that the Catholic Church, a lot of the mischief that occurred during the Obama administration, where Obama got his roots as a community organizer, has tentacles going into Catholic Church operations where they're getting huge payoffs, massive amounts of money in coordination with Soros run organizations, and going to trying to pick the winners and affect politics here in the US. And that's an aspect that hasn't been seen or discussed so far. Did I tell you anything you hadn't heard before, V?
No, you're doing great.
Had you heard any of that previously?
From you, yes, but I don't know if there's people on this broadcast right now that I haven't heard of this before.
But have you heard anybody anywhere talk about the Catholic Church aspect of who
No,
was
no.
behind
Everybody
it?
else is that's a topic nobody dare touches.
Well, and I don't think anybody's actually covered it anywhere. But it's
No,
huge. It's
it's massive.
massive
It's absolutely massive.
because they've been used. This conflict in these Muslim communities, and let me qualify this.
Well, the
I,
Vatican has a long. I mean, Muhammad himself was logistically and materially supported in the early days by the Catholic Church, man. So
well,
that's a long-standing link between Islam and Catholicism. Well, the
well,
Vatican itself, excuse me.
yeah, and there's pretty good research that there's people that make a very strong case that it was the Jesuits who essentially created the whole Muslim presentation.
Correct.
So, I'm sure that we'd have plenty of Muslims that would argue that, but there's no question there's a link, a correlation there. And so, again, You got to
I mean,
have the
look what
best
happened to him when he was
buy.
chased out of Medina the first time. He was where did he rest and recoup? Where did he all of a sudden come back with the men, the material, especially the money, the gold that was needed to pay off the mercenaries that were working with him after he was chased out of Medina the first time? It was at a
Yeah.
Jesuit monastery.
And again, so we have secret handshakes. Not everybody's who they appear to be, um, and become more and more legit over time. Let me just say something else. Most people will never have heard this anywhere. Um, Remember, how did Soros get his big jump start to become Soros? Where did he get all his first money, the big money? Do you remember, V? He is the guy who's credited
Shorted.
with having shorted the British pound and
Correct.
made massive amounts of money. Now, take a breath for a second and think about this. Uh, they wring their hands, they complain, they moan and groan because Soros did this and he damaged their currency. The Brits are famous for taking out people that go after anything in their economy. You don't think that Soros could have slipped on a banana peel if he was actually threatening the British pound and they didn't like that? Of course. What was really going on? They were moving money out of their system to a location, a person that could do their globalist deeds out of the city of London. And he's a false guy, he's a puppet, he's a facade. He's every bit the facade that Zuckerberg is over at Facebook. Facebook was a DARPA operation. The day that they stop it as a DARPA operation and go operational with it as a mainstream company, they put Zuckerberg in there with the whole idea. Supposedly he's this genius that's come up with this idea out of whole cloth. Bull effing shit. Not a chance. He was a creation out of whole cloth, as much a creation out of whole cloth as Barack Obama and other people at other organizations. These are figureheads. These are people that are created. They've done the gaming behind the scenes with these AIs, with these computer simulations to try to determine how to make companies that can win an economic war, if you will. The same thing we use in gaming out against countries for a real war or for an oil war or things. And then they put these figureheads in these places. Who's doing that? It's not officially done in the government. Technically, they're doing research, but behind the scenes, it's a secret handshake club. Again, did the FBI and the CIA go after President Trump? Those players that were involved in that activity were not truly working, doing the business that is the business of those agencies. They were in positions of control, of authority, and were able to pull the levers and force a direction, but those were not the constitutional correct activities of those agencies. They were rogues. They were uh, uh, essentially operating it on behalf of their globalist handlers behind the scenes. Do you think that Brennan is just doing this all by himself for his own gain? No. What did President Trump say yesterday? Let's go a little bit further back, even wider. Um, President Trump, in his news conference last night, talked about the fact that Kerry is going over to Iran. The Iranians are talking to Kerry repeatedly, and it's a violation of the Logan Act. He is actually lobbying and representing to the Iranians on behalf of the U.S. Well, he's no longer an ambassador. And he's over there doing this. It's a violation of the Logan Act. He should be in jail. He should be under charges. He should be, put in cuffs right now today. And that's what the president said. Why isn't he? Because it's a different standard. How come he gets to do that with impunity? Um, uh, and then if he's doing it now, what was he doing when he was actually in office under Obama? Here's a little curious thing. Where did Kerry choose to be on the day of the election in 2016?
Antarctica.
That's right. Where was the last trip that Barack Obama went to when he was getting ready to leave office?
Antarctica.
No, he went to Bariloche, southern tip
Oh,
of
I'm sorry, which is
Argentina,
close to Antarctica, right
right?
in Argentina.
Because you're dealing with this crowd that is this globalist crowd. Uh, to make a very long story short, we defeated the German army. We didn't defeat the Nazis. Where did they disappear to? They disappeared to South America, continue doing what they're doing. They're trying to run a globalist operation. This is these secret handshake clubs, etc., working out in the open all over the world. Um, and a good portion of them they're a breakaway society. They're living in Antarctica. That's not what people want to hear. It's outer space. It's whatever. Listen, there's a huge number down there that's going to become more apparent. Do you know what the military is doing right now? The military is building out the capability to do underground warfare. They're saying, for under cities, underneath buildings, in large mega cities, because we don't have that capability well built out, and also for underground facilities. Because there's, every country has lots of underground facilities, tremendous amount of them. I'm just going to say that a lot of those are in South America, far south, and Antarctica. And this administration isn't screwing around. It sees the threat for what it is. Why is John Kerry going and doing these negotiations and doing it with impunity? He's doing it because he's actually representing an entirely different group
Yeah,
than he
you said
thought he
something
was
about
representing.
underground warfare. It's pretty unique. You should say that, and why that sounds strange for a lot of people. Bro, there's a lot of talk, a lot of chatter, and I've only skirted the subject and on the surface. I never took a deep dive into it. It's not in my wheelhouse, but this is definitely in your wheelhouse. What does this have to do with Hollow Earth, man?
It's not hollow earth. It's that the crust is got lots of caverns and tunnels and all sorts of things. And so the first couple of miles of Earth do have a lot of passageways, etc. And of course, down in Antarctica, you have hot springs that come up under the ice. The ice is a couple miles deep. So uh, we have a number of lakes down there where the water coming up is heated like a hot springs underneath
Hmm.
the ice cap, and they're underground rivers, springs that flow out under the ice cap to the Arctic Sea. So you actually have passageways in under the ice, and you have an area of land that's 1.5 times the size of North America. It's a massive, massive area. Quick question. Very few people know this. In 42 and 43, the Nazis advertised for 50,000 women, Slavic
Yep.
women from Germany and Northern European countries to go down for an Arctic um, uh, uh, build out tour, whatever, supposedly because there wasn't enough men to go down there to do the work. So they send all these women down to South America and to Antarctica, both.
Hmm.
50,000 of them. Where'd they go? After the war, anybody ever talk about them? You got 50,000 women who just disappear into South America and into Antarctica. Uh, the numbers that we're probably dealing with down there are far, far larger than anybody has even begun to contemplate in the speculative community. And remember, it's all under an ice cap. You're not going to see a thing. It's under a mile of ice, 2 miles down. The roof in some of these things, just think of huge stadiums, but they're not the size of a little football stadium, they're the size of a city. Some of those caverns are 40, 50 miles long, a mile or two wide, following a riverbed. They don't
Yeah.
have any storms. They're 65 degrees year round, summer and winter. You have thermal energy, so you'd have natural heat, natural power. If you didn't want to go nuclear, if you got nuclear, you got everything because you can just melt out holes underneath the ice, and you can't see anything from above. And in fact, they're pretty hard to hit even with a nuke because a nuke just goes splash on top of the ice, makes a big flash. Uh, doing something going down a mile, especially if they have other capabilities, you're in a real fight. And there's all sorts of history there with Admiral Byrd and Operation High Jump and like that. Why was Kerry in Antarctica on the most important day that the Democrats had had probably in 30, 40, 50 years? Why is he there? Why did Barack Obama make his last stop in Bariloche? Because the Nazi regime is alive and well.
Correct.
And that group that's orchestrating that remember what was the deal with George H.W. Bush's father? He was a Nazi collaborator. He was charged as such after the war and had helped with the banking and things like that. When he is operating in CIA and he's doing secret handshake stuff, and then when the accusations are that he was present at the Kennedy assassination and involved in essentially assisting in a coup to take over government in the United States away from Kennedy and move it into other hands. And when he's present at CIA as director, and then when he's in there doing all the mischief that ends up being Iran Contra under the Bush administration and coordinating these things, you're dealing with a breakaway group of people that in the end really amounts to a breakaway government and civilization. They're trying to create their own country right under your noses, semi-invisible, and you don't realize it and orchestrate all the events, but it's getting harder and harder to not see it. And so the group around President Trump, military intelligence and National Security Agency, are fighting against the CIA and the FBI, who have been taken over. Their captured operations. Their operations have been taken over by this breakaway group that's trying to run the planet to bring us to this third world war so that they can get us to wipe each other out and they move into the vacuum. They're not actually trying to have a fight with us, they're trying to get us to have a fight with each other, and then we self eliminate. They walk into the vacuum after the fact. What's the fight going to be over? It's going to be a religious war. They're trying to create the context for a religious war between the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews. And they're coordinating these actions. What do you have to have? You got the best enemy money can buy. What what was the assertion with Russia, with the Soviet Union, that these families, these groups, especially Rockefellers, Rothschilds, those types of groups, they funded Lenin. They funded the revolution. They funded the Marxists. They created the best enemy money could buy so that we would have an opponent that we'd have to go fight. They gave them the technology. When we brought down the Soviet Union, and the wall came down, who went to his Dhaka in Georgia and administrated the uh, reorganization of the Soviet Union, or Russia, because the Soviet Union's gone, it collapsed? Who went there and orchestrated all of that?
That was that bastard David Rockefeller. He had
You
his
got it.
that slovenly fat useless idiot by the name of Boris Yeltsin, and they
Yeltsin, that's
tipped his
right.
hat to become the new president of Russia.
Think about that. So David Rockefeller goes over and administers the reorganization of the Soviet Union from his Dhaka in Georgia in the 90s, uh, keeping the best enemy money can buy in play, viable for their globalist schemes. He, famously said, he wouldn't, he doesn't apologize for trying to create a new world order. So he's in on this whole breakaway mentality, and you have a bunch of these globalists, just like Soros and others. They all have this plan, Zabrinsky and others, to create this new world order. How are they going to do it? They need the wars to do it. So what does Obama do? He goes in and he tries to reorganize the Mideast and get us ready with the Arab Spring to create conflict throughout the area to create the basis for a third world war there in Syria and Israel with the Christians involved. And he gets Europe and the US involved with all these Muslims transplanted here to create the furor for these internal conflicts. And in London, where people are ready to send their kids to go have a war in the Middle East again. You have to get them all ramped up. The best enemy money can buy. How much money did it take to buy this next war with Iran? The Obama administration sent billions upon billions upon billions, as well as materials, directly and indirectly, to this regime. And President Trump is there getting ready to dismantle some of that if we get the opportunity. If they just pass gas the wrong way, we're going to teach them a lesson that they're not going to forget for a long time.
Hmm.
And that money, you know, and who was orchestrating that, trying to save it? Who's trying to save it right now? What did President Trump say yesterday? John Kerry. John Kerry's having negotiations in violation of the Logan Act, and he doesn't get arrested. Why doesn't he get arrested? Why is he being allowed to do that? Who's financing him? Who's pushing him? Is it just John Kerry all by himself, and he's just doing it for business reasons, etc.? Don't fool yourself. He is part of a much bigger operation. He is just a player in a much bigger operation. And I would contend to your listeners, there's a lot of names you could call it: globalist, New World Order crowd, whatever, Nazis. Let's actually go with what it really is. It's the geopolitical, economic nation of Antarctica versus the rest of the world at this point in time,
Hmm.
whether you've ever heard it said that way before or not. And we're getting ready, we're training to do fighting under the ice, in the tunnels, in the cities, there, if they're going to force our hand. That's the
Wow.
fight, Ted.
Now, do they have, as many people have said? I mean, we all know about Operation High Jump. How Admiral Byrd came right back after that expedition. It was a complete failure. He was literally hightailing it out there. And then when Admiral Byrd and a few other congressmen got together, and I forgot the name of the Marine commandant at that time, but they wanted to nuke Antarctica. And right when that bill was about to go, is in the process of going through Congress. I forgot what the year it was. W. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was 1953, maybe 51. I'm not sure. Maybe even 49. It was at that moment that suddenly, in a Luftwaffe formation, UFOs appeared directly above the Capitol building. Do you remember that?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's even in National Geographic. Everybody kind of ignores it. What were you
Exactly.
going to
And then
say?
all of a sudden, that bill to nuke Antarctica got squashed.
Yeah. um, what was really going on there? Think about that. We have all the paperclip scientists over here, and they're uh, doing all sorts of bizarre things. Eisenhower was so upset that he was being kept from knowing what was going on out at Area 51 in Nevada. He says, "Look, I'm going out there to see what's going on. If I have to get Third Army and break down the gates with Third Army, we're going out there and find out what's going on." Because there was things happening there that he wasn't being kept apprised of. And who was running the base out there? Well, it was Air Force and it was CIA. Uh, Remember, Air Force didn't exist in World War II. It was the Army Air Corps. The Air Force was created in 47, and the CIA was also created in 47. But Area 51 didn't actually get going up until the early 50s. But I will tell you one other base that you've never heard of the name of uh, until just recently that was established in 47. And it was a gunnery location in World War II, and it was called Hilltop Air Force Base.
Mm.
And it was at the top of Laurel Canyon. And that was the place where they started doing all of the advanced coordination for the propaganda to control the American public in the world leveraging Hollywood. And that's where all the stars came from, all of the singers came from. Do you know that Hilltop Air Force Base at the top of Laurel Canyon, that Marilyn Monroe had a top secret clearance to come and go at that base? Jimmy Stewart had a top secret clearance to come and go at that base, and other stars. And what were they doing there? What was the deal with Marilyn Monroe? Remember when she broke out, became the big star? What was it?
Hmm.
It wasn't in Hollywood, it was in Playboy.
Right.
And what only recently become known, Playboy was getting money from the CIA at
Mm.
the outset. It was part of a honeypot operation to create these honeypots, supposedly to get foreigners and be able to cull contacts using this upfront agency company, Playboy, on the up and up for intelligence operations. So they were funneling money on the side.
And that's where
And
Norma Jean got her start, huh?
yes, so where did they send her from the Air Force Base as a kid? She's getting all of her training there at the base. It's a CIA operation. It was an Air Force base, but it was being run by the CIA. Where does the CIA get most of its officers from? They're tapped out of Air Force, always have been. So what did
Right.
President Trump do?
Space
President
Force.
Trump creates the Space Force because he needs a military command where he can pick from all the other ones, create a new one that is beholden to him and that he trusts, that isn't completely inundated with all of these people that have, globalist ties or questionable ties, um, political ties. Uh, an agency that's going to do his concerns. Remember, Nixon had the same concern. That's why he was trying to create the Houston Project, his own intelligence agency, because he couldn't trust the information he was getting out of FBI and CIA. They were lying to him. What has President Trump said? I don't need the briefing. Yeah, I don't need you. Don't have to come brief me. Why? Because anything they tell him, he knows is a lie. They can't tell the truth because they're all corrupt inside. What was the deal with Brennan? What was the deal with the FBI and Stroke and all that crowd and Comey? They're all lying to him. He can't trust a word they say because they're an active group operation and they've been infiltrated. They're captured operation by a globalist crowd, the likes of which is represented by John Kerry, for example, who's right now helping the Iranians craft their policy to keep President Trump and the American people in check in Iran. You know why Kerry's over there doing that coaching? Because they're hoping, since they haven't gotten traction on the dossier and the Russian thing and all that, what they're hoping is for an Iran hostage crisis type situation, only it's Iran holding the West hostage over oil flow in the Mideast. Uh, uh, Coming through the Strait of Hormuz. And so this ongoing threat that just doesn't get resolved for, a couple of years until after the election. President Trump and his crowd, they're not having it. They're not going to allow this to drag out with this sword over their head all the way up until the election. He's going to get in there. He's going to do business. He's going to solve this thing and put an end to it. And all those billions they got to be the best enemy money can buy aren't going to do them any good because President Trump isn't playing that game. And he's not wasting time hand wringing and dithering. He's consolidated his forces, consolidating power. Uh, Part of the next phase, as I started the show out with, is he now has to get the media that has been doing all of this attacking and damaging his administration and damaging his presentations on why we're doing things, how we're doing things, uh, to neutralize those enemies that are both enemies of this administration as well as enemies of the American people because they won't give us a straight story. And it's very one-sided, and their side is this globalist side. They're working on behalf of these globalists. The media was what was controlled with the operations out of the Hilltop Air Force Base. And by the way, what was that coordinated with? It was coordinated with Rand Corporation. Rand Corporation, let's go back to those effing Brits. Tavistock Corporation was created back at in the area of World War One, and Tavistock Corporation was about tailoring the communications and information so as to control the populace, not just in England but around the world, through all the Commonwealth countries and the rest of the world. And so it was all about social control and being able to move uh, uh, social consciousness, if you will, any direction they wanted to choose. And so it was investigating various ways to control society. Uh, their partner, just like we had OSS in World War II, Office of Strategic Services, doing our intelligence work, and that morphed into the CIA in 47. When we did that, we had coordinated our actions with British intelligence during World War II. So when CIA was created, it was really, in some ways, an extension of British intelligence here in the US, with all of these liaisons between the officers involved, working in these globalist ambitions, because we had these common enemies. So the sister organization from the propaganda side here in the US is Rand Corporation. Rand Corporation is the one that's coordinating all of the decision making for how things are being run at Hilltop, that's doing all the propaganda work down into Hollywood. And Rand Corporation is based there in Santa Monica, right down the street, right down the hill. What kinds of things came out of the Hilltop operation? Well, if you look there in Laurel Canyon, that's where all the 60s singers came that were the counterpoint to the British invasion with the Beatles and other ones. And the Beatles were run out of Tavistock. So affecting social norms and how people think and present. You got the Playboy thing. Just as an aside, when Playboy got in trouble financially, remember they had the Playboy bunny jet, the black bunny jet with the bunny ears on the back, 727. Who leased the jet from Playboy that kept the jet viable, gave money back into Playboy to keep them above water, keep them viable, leased it at kind of a high number? Department of Defense. And who's flying around the country in it? Paperclip Nazi scientists running back and forth to Bariloche in Argentina, and to Air Force and military
Wow.
installations across the US and to Area 51.
Wow.
When Playboy's in bankruptcy, they lease the plane and keep Playboy alive. Why? Because it was a CIA honeypot operation. And then let me just add this one thing, because I've said it before in your show, but a lot of your people might not have heard this before, and it's worth revisiting. So now, what was the allegation of the contractor who came out July 20th of last year on the anniversary of the death of Seth Rich, the person who went into the computers? They alleged it was Guccifer 2.0, the Russians that went into the DNC computers. It wasn't. That's all bullshit. When Seth Rich went into the computers and pulled out the Podesta files, the emails, all of the information that really is the reason Donald Trump is president at this point in time, it was the basis for the WikiLeaks release and Guccifer 2.0 release. Prior to that, what uh, uh, what did the contractor say? This contractor worked over at Justice Department, and he was going to be there in person, but he ended up doing it by phone. And at this news conference that was conducted by phone, it said, he says, his attorney says, by the way, this is not somebody that's just talking by the phone and it's a LARP or it's BS. This person that's talking to the reporters on the phone at the hotel there in Washington, D.C., has already testified behind closed doors at the House and at the Senate. And what does he say on the phone in that interview? And you can go online and find it and take a listen to it from July 20th of last year. The contractor says that he's working in the office of that also is Rod Rosenstein's, and that he had heard other contractors doing the same work as he was doing, bragging about and laughing about the circumstances under which Seth Rich died, and that they had been involved in the murder of Seth Rich. What does he also say? He testified to the House and the Senate that Rod Rosenstein was in charge of blackmail, payoffs, honeypots, and murder of federal judges. That he was the guy in charge of keeping federal judges under control. Well, who's he doing it for? Who is Rod Rosenstein actually working for? And you look at the pictures of Rod Rosenstein, and then you look at Speer from the Nazis, has a big resemblance. And the contention's been, in part, we're dealing with the boys in Brazil situation, that we don't just have one or two people that aren't who they say they are. It's not just Barack Obama. It's not just Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs or any of these other players that, we could go down the list and name a dozen or two. There's a whole pile of them that are plants that are part of this broader operation that are doing the same thing as John Kerry is, the smartest, one of the 5 wise men of the world. They are put in places of control and authority to influence the direction that the country goes, but they're working for someone other than you and I as American citizens or these citizens in these other countries. These people are running their own shadow government for their own country. Let's just say it. A Nazi regime that survived the war. Yeah, we defeated the German army. We didn't defeat the Nazis. They went underground, and they're all around us. And they've gotten control inside of our operations. Who's flying around on the Playboy jet? Paperclip scientists running all over the country on the Playboy jet, going to Area 51, going to White Sands, New Mexico, going to Bariloche, right there in plain sight. This isn't as hard to figure out as it maybe would have been 10, 15, 20 years ago. And what President Trump said yesterday concerning John Kerry, why wasn't he picked up instantly? Why didn't President Trump just have him picked up instantly? He could have, because it's a violation of the Logan Act. That's treason. But these people do it all the time. They have their, when Barack Obama became the candidate for president, first time around, during the election cycle in 2016, in May, they had a Bilderberg meeting right there in Maryland, right next door to Washington, D.C. And they had not just one or two, they had like 500 guests that all show up. The news media looks the other direction, doesn't say a word. It's a Bilderberg meeting. And who's there? Everybody. Kissinger, Bush's, Clinton's, Obama's. All of these players are there. And they're having this secret conclave meeting, Jimmy Carter, the whole schmear. And what did they really do? They went in there, and Hillary Clinton made her presentation why she should be the candidate for the Democrats. And all of her delegation spoke for her and made the case. And then Barack Obama's people made the case and decided, and then he presented with all the delegates that he should be the candidate. That all went on for 4 days. And then they had a vote. And when they got done, Barack Obama's the candidate, and Hillary Clinton steps down, backs off, and lets him, become the candidate and starts throwing underhand softballs. He becomes the Democratic candidate, and then after he gets in office, she gets State Department. That was a violation of the Logan Act. There was an international group of people there deciding who was going to get to be the Democratic candidate. Now, does that make sense? Isn't that like a variation of what just happened. They decided that Hillary got to be the presidential victor, if you will, and anybody that was going to fight against that, they were going to fight them tooth and nail. The same club, the same crowd is the one behind the dossier. This foreign group of people, these treasonous, lying, traitorous vipers operating out of the city of London, operating out of Europe, trying to control US elections. This is not something new. It's been going on for a long time. This president and the crowd behind him over military intelligence and NSA have been able to coordinate their actions well enough to get him into office. And you're seeing the reversal of a coup that goes back not just a couple of years, but decades and decades to the Kennedy assassination. And this is why it's so important that right now, the president, in order to win this next phase, to begin the actual engagement, now that he's moved off of defense, this 2 years, 2.5 years of defense that he's been on continuously, as we start to go on the offensive, what's the first thing you do when you go to war with an opponent? You take out their comms. Hollywood, mainstream media are in the sights. The next 3 to 4 months, that will be target one. And if you put a player or two out there just for optics, a Comey, a McCabe, you let them get arrested and we save the other ones for later in the fall after the testimony, that would work too. But you got to take their comms out, and that's the part that they're not going to be able to handle, and that's the summer. That's the entertainment that we're looking forward to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. W, very well said, my man. Very well said. Thank you again for being on with us. Man, solid 2 hours is fantastic. Actually, an hour and a half. But thank you, man. It was power packed, folks. Thank you all for listening in. Any closing comments, W?
No, I think, I mean, I obviously I glanced over so much, but me, I could talk for a week straight on this. I'm trying to give your listeners at least a starting place and some provocative stuff. We're dealing with a breakaway. That's the real war. It's just hard to go to that place in the conversation for most of the public because it's just too far out because the media has never given you that story coherently.
Yep.
But when I give it to you that way and you have time to think about it, I think it starts to make a lot of things more understandable and make sense. And that's the real conflict that we're in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for joining us. W, thank you so much. You folks have a wonderful weekend.
All right.